We come now to the application of the SAGs from the perspective of the consultant. The application has started, and you can see the configuration section in the metamodel described. This is the template repository area where you can define additional or altered system architectures. First, let's focus on the topic of modeling, not from the perspective of implementation, but from that of a technical design.
That is, this is the view with which the consultant or a customer service representative would work?
Exactly. A consultant would work with this view, and we'll now implement an address management system as an example.
So this means that in order to perform these steps, I don't have to be a software developer?
Precisely. So to create a new project, we open Projects and click New. This is an address management project, and so we'll also use address management for the brief description. That's enough for now. The architecture is a concept realization. You could also add the author at this point, but this is not really necessary. There are two objects for an address management system. We'll call you Test Client, but you also have to define what the menu item is called for the end-user interface. We'll call the tabular display Customer List.
And I could already tell it, I want to have it in another language, for example in English.
Absolutely. I can input the interface directly in German and English, as you can see here. The detail graphic interface we'll call Customer Data or Client Data. With this click, we set up a menu item for customer care. Now let us consider a few attributes we'd like to assign to the customer. Here we'll take a salutation, which is titled with ID address. The attributes are selected from a data dictionary, which can be expanded at any time.
That means that it would also be possible for several people to work on a project simultaneously?
Definitely, because the system is multi-user, multi-tenant, and multi-language capable.
So if I, as a consultant A or developer A, open projects, my colleagues can use these projects right away?
Absolutely. They can be accessed immediately. Here we enter the titles, in this case Mr. and Ms. Then we enter the attribute last name or surname. Then the attribute first name. Finally, the attribute date of birth. That's enough to get started. Now, as a consultant, we have to qualify the attributes. Here, if we have a list, we determine that you can search for, as well as which columns, which fields, and which mandatory fields should be in the list.
Can you change it?
Anytime. We'll look at that a bit later. But first, let's mark all entries in detail, and the address is a drop-down menu with the two fixed choices, Mr. or Ms., which we have already determined separately. As a consultant, we also want to have a validation. In this case, the customer may not be a minor.
At the same time, I have to take into account, since it is to be a German and English application, then I have to have not only Herr and Frau, but also Mr. and Miss in the list. Where do I enter this then?
We'll demonstrate that in the implementation. Even if we only produce the application in German and the application is already generated, a translation system is integrated with which the end user can translate the application into many languages. We have French, English, Portuguese, and Chinese in the program. That is, we tell the system, export from language A to language B. This gives us an Excel spreadsheet with 2 columns. You give this to a translator. The Excel table is translated, then imported back into the system. Now, bingo, the application can speak Portuguese.
Now, different languages have different word lengths. How does the application deal with this?
As a consultant, one must also take care of that and check the screens and then adjust them accordingly. Now, we define that it is a validation using a field. We designate it customer is of age with the note. The message text would then read, customer must be of legal age. Then, as a consultant, we can still extend text to read, customer must be at least 18 years of age.
So the developer sees this comment, and has he to model a couple of things that would be, in our view, too complicated for the consultant? That is, at this point, the consultant can already let the developer know what else he needs to do.
Yes, those might be things that need to be modeled and or programmed by hand. In such cases, everything will be 100% generated by the system, but perhaps in a more technical way that, in our view, might be unnecessarily complicated for the consultant.
Then this would be the medium of communication from consultants to developers.
Exactly. Well, that's it then. The attributes are all there, as you can see. We have already created the clients, and now we need a second object with the content address, since we want to implement an address management system in which we can assign a customer more than one address. The menu item is titled Addresses. The tabular display is called Address List. We'll call the graphic interface Address Data. And if we want to have it in English, then we'll enter Addresses in the menu, and in the tabular display we'll write Address List. The English detail mask is entitled Address Data. Now we need to connect the address with the customer. For this, we'll create a diagram and call it Address Management Object Model. The diagram type should be an object for the project Address Management. Now we arrange the 2 objects here and connect the dot address to the point customer.
And this happens in a purely graphical view?
This can also be done in a tree structure. Right now, we just want to show that there are several ways.
Are there restrictions on how many objects I can connect?
No, there are projects in which the number of objects can very easily get out of hand. We have to mark edit list for the object relationship. This means that when we input a customer, then of course we also want to maintain his addresses accordingly. We also have to assign a few attributes to the address, in which case a street or a house number, postal code, and of course the city. Now we determine which attributes should appear in the application. Here they are: the search criteria, postal code, and city. All 3 points are to appear in the column list. Here the zip code is defined as the required field, and all 3 are marked as detail entry fields. We can also add an address type such as home, business, or billing address. Here we'll use business and home. So we'll select address type, and for values we'll enter business and home.
I can also make multiple entries.
Yes, that's also unlimited. You could even enter a vacation address in addition. What we're maintaining here as a list, we can also maintain individually, so that here the address type becomes a search criterion, and input is possible in detail, and a drop-down menu with fixed selections appears. That's enough for the moment. Now we can already visualize the application as a prototype. To do this, click on View and then on Concept Prototype. This opens our address management as a program that has only one menu item called Customers. If we click on it, we get a list of customers with a search by name or date of birth, from to. Here we can insert a new address with the option Mr. or Ms. with first and last name and date of birth. We also see the required fields, which are marked with asterisks. And even though the application is only a prototype and still no code has been generated, the application already stores data in a common data pool, which the generator provides. As you can see, an address list is already assigned to the customer. That is, we can now assign to this customer addresses with street, house number, postal code, and address type. The generator stores it immediately, and when we open the customer data, we see here that it still has all of the attributes, even though the application has not actually been generated yet.
And if I, as a customer, would like to have a fundamentally different design with a different look and feel, is that possible?
In this case, the application has been started as a normal Windows client. That is, the applications are limited here in the prototype.
But I could always input my own layout and then always get the application on my own predetermined design?
That's right. This application has now been launched as a normal client, but we can start the same application as a web client. Both access the same model. Let's test that now and restart the server, open a browser, and see the prototype on the web. We access the prototype address management, then we see the customer information input screen, and as you can see, all of the data are already available. This means that as a consultant and non-programmer, you can already set up everything in order to see whether everything you and your client have imagined runs as desired, and if it's complete.
That means that we can display either a desktop application and a web application with a single click?
Absolutely, namely as a prototype and also afterwards in the real application which is generated. Okay, now let's make a change. Let's go back into the machine and customize the graphic interface because here the postal code field is as wide as the city field and we want to change that. That is, as a consultant, I can customize the interface. To do this, we simply enter the dialog editor, click on our project, and then on the object panel, I can easily adjust the size of the individual input boxes as desired, both in length and in spacing, and then save the changes. Now let's go back to the web application still running in the background and look, our changes are already there.
So that means the consultant, the user, is able to make such changes by himself, to discuss it with the end customer, and then, when the final design has been decided on, this will be carried over to development without loss. This is the often mentioned production line, which is now available in software development for the first time.
We can also make complicated changes, such as inserting the additional parameter country. For this, we go back to the model, in the model workplace, and add the additional attribute field country. Here, code hasn't been generated yet because we are merely acting as a consultant and modeling a technical requirement. Now we define that the attribute country should also be an input field.
So we enter a request on demand and immediately see the result. Well, that's WYSIWYG a la Windows in the purest form.
Exactly. Beforehand, we go into the dialog editor and click on refresh. Then the attribute country appears and I can immediately adjust it accordingly and save the changes. So I've added a new field and adjusted the layout on the fly. Now we switch to the swing view, and with a double click, the interface appears with the addition of the attribute country. And in the web display, we can see that soon after a refresh, the new attribute is already there. Well, now we've had a look at the prototype, but as a consultant, we can also click on this question mark icon and SAG will produce a requirements definition, which describes this interface exactly, including a screenshot.
So what do I do with this requirements definition?
We can also provide our customer with this requirements definition. We can read it while using the prototype in order to get an overall impression and finally approve the concept.
And as a downstream quality assurance measure, one could also set up test cases.
Of course, although test cases can also be machine-produced from the model. Another note, because we are in this screen, the requirements definition is also created just for this interface. But if you close all screens and click on the question mark, an entire business concept will be created, including contacts for support, goals, and objectives, with complete descriptions of the screens and with links so that you can jump from screen to screen. This alone would normally mean a lot of work. We would like to draw your attention to this field in which we have noted that the customer must be at least 18 years of age. Should this not be the case, immediately the message "Customer must be of legal age" will pop up. This message also appears in the requirements definition.
That means this is exactly the documentation that usually has to be tediously and painstakingly created only in the product management phase. But here, based on the specifications, it's created at the press of a button.
Exactly. And it's very important to remember we have on the one hand a prototype and on the other hand the requirements definition. Because both are derived from the same model, they're always a perfectly matched pair.
And we can get the requirements definitions subsequently in other languages too. For instance, if we would do a development project in the English-speaking world, then we can easily create it in any language such as English, Chinese, etc., assuming we have defined the corresponding templates.
Exactly. At the moment we have templates for English and German, which has been enough up to now.
But as soon as we add a French template, we immediately get a French technical requirement.
You just have to make sure to input the descriptions in French, but the creation of the technical requirements is created by the generator independently. The same requirements that we have produced from the web application with web forms can, of course, also be produced by the Swing or the desktop application. In the desktop application, we have the menu item Export Technical Specifications. The generator will again produce all the screenshots and the requirements, which this time doesn't include the web interfaces, but the desktop interfaces. The content is, of course, identical, as you can see here. Thus, the work of the consultant is finished. Now he passes the model on to the developer, who seamlessly transforms it into a true enterprise application. This is what we'll show you in the next section.